All right, thank you so much. Yes, as Eric said, I'm Cassie Anderson, and I'm here today to talk to you about seed starting. We are Colorado State University. We are an equal opportunity provider, so we provide our resources to all without discrimination. If you want to learn more, you can go to colostate.edu and find out more. Okay, today what I'm going to cover is probably far too much, but I'm going to try and get through it. We're going to talk about why seed starting is good. We're going to talk a little bit about how seeds work and understanding them, as well as seed testing. I'm going to walk you through the information that you're going to find on many seed packets, go through the supplies that you need to start seeds, as well as germinate seeds, a little bit on planning your schedule, growing out your transplants, sowing seeds outdoors, which is one of the big things that we'll be starting to do in the next 2 to 6 weeks or so. And then I will go into a little bit of specifics on selected crops, which I might shorten if we're getting short on time at the end. So let's dive right in. Why is it nice to start seeds? There's a lot of different reasons, and everybody I know starts seeds and works with seeds for different reasons. Starting your own seeds can be very cost effective. It might cost you $3 to $8 to buy a seedling, but it might cost you the same to buy a seed packet that has 30 seeds in it. So you could then start 30 seedlings for the same price of one seedling. You can also really pinpoint the specific species or varieties that you're growing. A lot of nurseries might not be growing that really cool new tomato variety that you just found out about, but you can buy them as a seed. You can also pinpoint your timing for planting. A lot of times nurseries will get in seedlings earlier than it might really warrant planting. So you can make sure that you're planting exactly when is going to be good for your particular situation. You can have control over how they're growing, especially if you are planting things that don't like their roots disturbed, like the cucurbits, your melons, cucumbers, pumpkins, etc. You want to plant those when they're if you start them as seeds inside and plant them out, you want to plant them when they're very, very small, 1 to 3 true leaves growing. So not very large at all, and that can be hard to buy them at that stage. Also a great opportunity to share your seedlings with others. So maybe you start all the tomatoes, and a friend of yours who also gardens is going to start peppers, and you'll have a little swap-a-roo so that you can have more variety in your landscape. And it's super fun and satisfying. Every year I love starting seeds because you look at them and it's this little brown thing, and then all of a sudden it's green, it's growing, it's giving you the hope that spring is coming. It's very satisfying. So let's dive into a little bit on how seeds work. What do seeds need to germinate? In their most basic form, seeds need water, they need air, they need light, and the correct temperature. In all of those in the correct amounts in order for them to push out the radicle, the root, and the cotyledons, which are those first leaves that come out. Seeds generally and plants can be divided into two categories. There's the monocots, which have one cotyledon, parallel veins, usually some kind of fibrous root system, and their flowers are usually in multiples of threes. I'm not going to read all of these, but monocots. Dicots, a lot more of our traditional vegetables that we grow are dicots. They're going to have two little cotyledons that pop out when the seedling first germinates. Their veins are usually kind of in a net shape. And you can kind of understand how those seeds are working based on whether they're monocot or dicot. When you look here, so you've got those little cotyledons resting in there. A lot of the rest of the seed is nutrient storage that will allow that seed to grow up for a little while before it has enough leaves on it to feed itself. It's kind of a self-sustaining entity in the early stages of being a seed. Generally speaking, seeds have several different phases of germination. They take up a lot of water early on. Then in the second stage, they might kind of look like they're sitting there. This is a part that can be hard to be patient for when you're growing seeds, particularly for the first time, because it can take a while. For some flower seeds, it can take over a month from that uptake of water into that preparation for germination, and then finally entering into that emergence phase when you start seeing the radicle and the shoot beginning to grow out of the seed itself. So understanding that there's a little bit of patience that may be involved in how long it takes for seeds to grow can be an important thing in starting your seeds successfully. So those parts of the seed coat, again, you've got that main seed starts to open up, the radicle, the root grows out, and then eventually those cotyledons emerge, and you finally get what I was calling those true leaves. So the cotyledons on a dicot are going to be two little leaves. They're usually opposite each other. And then those true leaves will emerge, and they will look completely different from the cotyledons. Cotyledons often look separate. They look distinct from the true leaves on most plants. Monocots are going to be very similar, except there's only that one cotyledon that's coming out at the very beginning. Okay, a little bit more background on seeds. A few terms that might be useful as you're looking for what seeds you want to plant, what plants you want to grow. What is a variety? A variety is a naturally occurring variation of an individual plant within a species. The characteristics that make that plant distinguishable are usually reproducible in its offspring. So thornless honeysuckle, or not honeysuckle, honey locust, is a natural selection of a tree that is reproducible year over year from seed. Heirloom tomatoes, same thing. You save those seeds from your heirloom tomatoes, and they're going to grow true to seed, true to type year over year. On the other hand, you might have hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are a cross between two distinct species or distinct parent lines that produce a desired offspring. If you save seeds from hybrid plants, they're usually not going to grow true to seed. There's examples of like hybrid tea roses that I have pictured here, or a bunch of tomatoes are often sold as hybrids. Hybrids can have better disease resistance. They might have better taste profile or some kind of desirable thing. One year I got a hybrid cherry size tomato that was just delightful the taste was delightful, and I'd gotten it as a seedling and tried to save the seeds, didn't know it was a hybrid. It did not grow true to type the next year. They were cherry brandywines, that's what they were. And they were wonderful, but they did not save, and I never spent the time and effort to find new ones to replace them. So there's a few things to understand about your seeds, especially if you're like me and you tend to use your seeds and then they sit in a box for years and years and years. There's several different concepts. One of them is viability. Viability is testing how many of the seeds are still alive, still germinating. If you have high viability in your seeds, you don't have to plant very many because they're going to grow well. They're going to be successful in how in their growth. And you can do this super simply. These are lab example pictures, but you can do it as simply as putting them in a container with a very damp paper towel, put 10 seeds in. If you get 9 or 10, 8 to 10 of them that are germinating and growing well, then you've got really good viability, and you probably are pretty good just to plant. If you're only getting 3 or 4, then maybe you plant 3 seeds in the hole instead of 1 to make sure that you're getting good germination, and then you'd thin it down to 1 once they're grown. Vigor, on the other hand, is how rapidly those seeds are growing. So lower vigor, you see these just aren't very large. They're not very robust, but they are still growing. They're germinating. They're just not as robust. And you can see this sometimes, especially in tomatoes. You might have a hybrid tomato. You plant it, it germinates super fast, it grows super big, and it's much larger than one of its companions that maybe was a little bit slower. What do you need to know when you're looking at a seed packet? Commercial seed packets like these ones are going to give you a lot more specific information. They might tell you what their germination rate is, their purity, their lot number, so that if something does go wrong, you can call back to it. More often, you're going to be seeing seed packets like this that will tell you what kind of plant are you buying? What seed are you buying? What variety is it in specific? What is its scientific name? How much seed are you getting? Sometimes it will tell you a number of seeds or a weight of seeds. It can vary even within the same company. It will also tell you how long it will take to get to maturity. It's good to know on the seed packet, this days to maturity is from it having germinated, or it's from it being transplanted out into the garden if it's something you start inside. So it's sometimes a little bit misleading, that 65 days. It's not 65 days from the day you put that seed into seed starting setup inside or into the ground outside. It's also going to give you information about how to plant it overall. How deep does the seed need to be? How much spacing do you need between them? Do you need to thin it? Are you going to start it outside or inside? Does it need a lot of sun, or can it tolerate some shade? And it will tell you, it often will tell you the mature size of the plant as well. Some seeds give you some inside packet information as well. This particular company I love because they show you a picture of the seedling. If you're not familiar with that seedling, it gives you a little idea of what to look for, especially if you're going through trying to look at some weeding. So lots of different cool information on seed packets. Read them so that you know a lot more about your plant. All right, let's dive into what do you need to start seeds indoors. We're kind of past the peak of starting seeds indoors, but there's still plenty of things that you can start inside. You can start another round of lettuce. You can start your cucurbits, those melons, cucumbers, squash, etc. in even a few weeks from now. But if you want to start inside, there's lots of different things you can use to put your seed, your seed mix and your seeds into. You can use things like these little greenhouse kits, the Jiffy Pot kind of thing, or you can use the plastic cell packs. You can use repurposed kitchen containers. That's honestly the way that I have started to go to. I used to buy the Jiffy Pots all the time, but I have so much plastic waste that I can reuse. And especially like these strawberry containers, they already have drainage built in. They've got that humidity top that you can keep moisture in with. They're a really nice option, and you already have them if you're buying produce regularly. You also will need some kind of material to plant your seeds in. So it's good to understand here the difference between different materials. Seed starting mix is going to be a very particular combination, usually of vermiculite, or perlite, maybe peat moss and coir. And it's usually very fine material because you don't want your seeds to get lost in the material. In terms of purchasing these materials, you can buy it as a pre-mixed material, or you can buy the individual peat moss coir, some vermiculite or perlite, and you can mix them together to make a mix that you really want. When you're starting seeds, using that seed starting mix can be a very good idea because potting mixes aren't always going to be guaranteed to be sterile, and you can get issues with disease that can kill your seedlings. It's called damping off. Garden soil is another product you might see on the shelves. That is actually designed to be put into the ground outside, not used for starting seeds or growing stuff inside. Someone asked if there's recommendations for non-plastic options for new seeds. I do, in another rendition of this class, we do making little pots out of newspaper or large pieces of paper. They will fall apart over time, but usually by the time they're falling apart, you're looking to transplant them up or put them out into the garden. Really, if you're using something that's not plastic, then you're probably looking at some kind of paper kind of product that will be falling apart eventually, but maybe you put it into a reusable tray of some kind or container that can keep it contained until you're ready to transplant up or out into the garden. Next up for starting seeds, thinking about watering. Some way to water your seedlings gently is important. You can use a mist head for your hose, a smaller watering can. I like it when they have a head that's kind of like this guy on here because it can water gently. If possible, and I'm going to just go back 2 slides, if you can have a system like this where you can water from underneath, where there's lots of holes in the bottom of the tray, watering from underneath using that capillary action to bring water up into the media can be really, really good for keeping things moist without disturbing the seedlings themselves. Someone also asked about potting soil recommendations for when potting up. Generally speaking, as long as you can have it light and fluffy, lots of air in there, it can be really, it's going to be pretty good for your seedlings. And I'm going to talk about fertilizer in a little bit as well. I don't have specific brands that I recommend. Okay, so yes, watering gently, watering from underneath, if possible, are both going to be really important. Some people will use like a spray bottle and keep the soil surface moist, especially in the early stages of getting seeds to germinate. But yeah, it can be, watering is a very important part of starting your seedlings. People often ask about fertilizer. You really don't need to fertilize your seedlings until after that first true set of leaves have popped out of the seedling. When they're at the cotyledon stage, they've got what they need to get growing. Really, once those first leaves emerge and you're potting it up into maybe a larger container, that's when you might give them a starter fertilizer like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or even just a little light shot of nitrogen can be effective. Or you can transplant into media that you've mixed a little bit of fertilizer into, and that can really kind of give everything a jump start into growing nicely in their new home. Next up for starting seeds is lighting. Do you need supplemental lighting? And what kind of light do you use? Sometimes people have plenty of success with just a window location. I love this picture. I stole it off the internet. But they've actually created angled shelves that give them the maximum of light coming in from the window. When you're relying on light from a window, light intensity reduces by about 50% for every foot that you come in from a window. So as close as you can get to the window, the better. If you don't have a nice window like that, supplemental lighting, LEDs have gotten very inexpensive and can be very good for starting seeds successfully. But you can use a traditional shop light as well. If you buy a cool bulb for one of the bulbs and a warm bulb for the other, that gives you a little bit wider spectrum of light and can be a pretty effective way to manage your lights. Or you can go to any of our favorite online retailers, and for a fairly low cost, you can buy an LED light. Lighting, you generally want to have them only lit for about 16 hours a day. You want to give them a little bit of rest time as well. And ideally, you want that light to be quite close to your seedlings. So if you can have it on a chain like this one that you can raise up as the seedlings grow, that's going to give you a lot better results. Other materials, other supplies, some kind of humidity control. Keeping seedlings really moist when they first start out is really, really good for successful seed germination. So that can be something like that Jiffy system where there's a plastic dome that goes over the top. Honestly, for some of mine this year, I just put some saran wrap over the top for the week or so before they germinated and then took it off once they had germinated. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. A heat mat is a really great way to ensure good germination, because if you're putting heat on your seedlings, they're going to germinate more rapidly. Peppers are a great example of this. They often are a fairly slow germinator. If you have a heat mat that's about 80 to 83 degrees or so underneath them, you're going to get a lot more rapid germination. So it might be you get germination in 2 weeks instead of 3 weeks or more when you put heat on them. And some of the heat mats are a little bit fancy. You can actually set exactly what temperature the seedlings like to germinate at. A timer can also be a good idea. You can plug a timer into the lights and into the heat mat. If you keep your house very warm in the day and let it cool down at night, maybe you just have the heat mat on at nighttime. Next up is labels. This is where I am infamous. I always think, okay, well, I'm going to remember the order in which I planted these, and I'm going to be good to go. You're not going to remember. We never remember. Unless you have some crazy cool visual memory or something like that, then it can be good to label very carefully and remember the order in which you labeled. Are your seeds behind it or in front of the labels that you got? So labeling is good. If you're doing separate containers, I'd like to just use a piece of masking tape and a Sharpie. And then finally, a fan for air movement. Once those seedlings get up and start growing, having a fan to force those seedlings to move just a little bit is going to give them a lot more strength and structure, so they're going to transplant really well. Someone asked if you're getting uneven germination, should you leave them under the dome or try and remove? Generally, once your seeds have mostly germinated, that's when you take that humidity dome off, or else you're going to start seeing issues with humidity. You'll start seeing algae growing on the surface and that kind of thing. That humidity dome is really there for the early stages of germination. If you're planting things that take vastly different amounts of time to germinate, like lettuce and a pepper in the same container, that might be a good argument for using separate containers for those separate things, those separate needs, because those lettuces are going to start knocking up on the humidity container and struggling a little bit. So probably a good idea not to. Okay, quick little summary of some common issues and their solutions. If you're seeing algae growth on the surface of your media, then you can reduce your moisture. Open up, if you have a humidity dome, open that up, let more moisture in, maybe add a fan on. Same with if you're seeing fungus, kind of gray mold on the surface of your soil. If you're seeing your seedlings breaking at the soil surface, it often means that you're reusing soil that's been used for something else, and it has damping off fungus in it. If your seedlings are growing really long and really spindly, typically that means that they're not getting sufficient light. They're doing what is called etiolation, and they're stretching out, trying to reach light. Get any light that you have closer to them, move it closer to a window if possible, or add light if you are able to. If your seed packet has gotten wet or if it's very old, that's when you want to do that viability test that I talked about, test that germination and see where you're at. If your seedlings have started to grow and they get yellow, it's good to recognize what part of the seedling is getting yellow. If it's that cotyledon, those first 1 or 2 leaves that come out when the seedling first germinates, those will yellow and fall off as the plant grows and develops, so that's not something to be concerned about. But if it's the new growth, then you might need to add more light or give them a little bit of a fertilizer shot. If they've been stressed, I actually overheated a bunch of seedlings for a project this year for a class that I did, and the seedlings got very yellow because they'd gone through the stress of being overheated, and once I gave them a little shot of nitrogen, they greened up and they looked great again. So things can go wrong, most definitely. There's a couple different things to know about vegetable seeds. In terms of germination, temperatures, a lot of our seeds like to germinate warm, but they can germinate cooler. They're just going to germinate more rapidly when they are warm. If you see, even our cool season vegetables like to germinate at 70 or 80 degrees. But they will germinate cooler. It just might take them a little bit longer to germinate. This is a garden note that we have, Garden Note 720. If you're curious, maybe Eric or Lisa can pop that into the chat for you so you can reference it as you're thinking about how you want to germinate your seeds. Some of these can also benefit from pre-germinating. If you put them into a Ziploc bag or a container with a damp paper towel for a day or two before you put them into the garden, then you can get a little bit more rapid germination. Time to germination is also on that same fact sheet and can be very useful to know, or you can take a screenshot of this if you'd like to. We're also recording it, you can reference it later, but effectively you're looking at how long does it take to germinate. So some things, broccoli might germinate in as little as 3 days, carrots might take as much as 17 days to germinate. And then how long days to harvest, if relevant, how long is it going to take to grow them out before you transplant them? So these are good when you're kind of thinking through your calculations, and we'll go through this very quickly. I know a lot of you, if you haven't already started peppers or tomatoes or eggplant or broccoli, probably at this point you're looking more at purchasing seedlings from the nursery rather than starting them yourself, because we're just getting a little bit too late. Ooh, nice question. Someone asked if there are seeds that do not benefit from pre-germination. A lot of them really will, as long as you're just getting them to the point where they've absorbed water and they're softening. They're at that first peak on that chart that I showed, and they're in that prepping for germination stage. So you're just soaking them for 24 hours or so. It's not for like a full week. You don't want them to already be growing at the point that you germinate them. You're just pre-moistening them, getting them nice and warm, and jump starting them a little bit. But when you're planning your planting schedule, if you start too soon, your plants are going to be way too big and it can stress them out more and stunt them somewhat when you do transplant. If you start too late, the plants might be a little bit weak when you're transplanting, or you may not get a harvest before we get a freeze. Our growing season is not very long in Colorado, so anything that's above 100 to 110 days to maturity is going to be a big stretch to successfully grow here. So there's two main dates that are important to know in terms of our growing season. The first is our last frost date, which is confusing because it's the beginning of our season, but it's our last frost date. Usually here in the Front Range of Colorado, our last frost date is mid-May, around Mother's Day or so. Often it may be a little bit later, as late as Memorial Day. So sometime in that mid-May to late May window is when we see our last frost date. That's when those warmer season crops can often be planted out. And then you've got until our first frost date, which is usually sometime in early October, at least along the Front Range here. Knowing those dates, that can kind of help you figure out when you're going to be starting your seedlings versus when you're going to be planting them out. So when you think about it, you want to know what your frost dates are. And in terms of your specific crop, you want to know how long that takes that crop to germinate, how long until that seedling has developed, usually somewhere in the window of 2 to 4 weeks. How many days does it take for maturity so that you know when to start it inside? You'll count backwards. The seed packet should tell you when to start it inside. But for tomatoes, for example, you usually want to start it about 4 to 5 weeks before the last frost date. So you're counting back, and that's usually early April. So we're a little bit later than ideal for starting tomatoes. So you start them late March, early April. Then you have a nice seedling that's up to size by mid-May or late May even. So generally speaking, this doesn't include germination time, but our cucumbers, melons, squash, and lettuce, they need about 2 to 4 weeks of growing time inside before we put them outside. That means we're probably starting them very late April, very early May to plant them out by late May, Memorial Day-ish. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, tomatoes are going to take a little bit longer. They take 5 to 7 weeks. So you're looking at maybe even almost 2 months before the last frost date, you're getting those guys started. Even longer, eggplants, leeks, onions, peppers, and some herbs, early March, starting to think about getting those in. And if you are someone who likes to grow flowers from seed, you might be looking at over 10 weeks. So you might be starting in February or even late January for some flower varieties to give them good time to grow inside and plant outside once we reach that last frost date. So specific example, here we've got our tomato. Takes 1 to 2 weeks, 14 days for a tomato to germinate. A lot of them will germinate more quickly than that. Some of them might be slower. Takes about 6 weeks for the seedling to grow from germination to that transplantable size. From that point, it takes about 11 weeks to get to maturity. So you count back from those 11 weeks to figure out when our last frost date is and how you need to plant things out. There are a couple notes on here. Generally speaking, seedlings will slow down in their growth a little bit when you transplant them because it's a very shocking thing to be transplanted from the cushy, perfect environment inside to the reality of a Colorado climate. And sometimes we have summers like last summer where we were cool and rainy until mid-July, which really slowed things down. So it may take longer to reach maturity than the estimates on the label itself. When you're working with your transplants, there's a couple things to be aware of. Don't wait too long. This little basil is about the perfect size. It's got 2 or 3 sets of true leaves, and it's strong. It's big enough and strong enough that it's going to manage the stress of transplant quite well. But when you're thinking about transplanting your seedlings out, make sure the outside temperatures are warm enough for the seedlings. Tomatoes in particular can be princesses. If it's too cool out, if the soils in particular are too cool, they are likely to sulk, and they may sulk for most of the season and just not grow very well. Um, Once you know that soil temps and air temps are going to be good and your seedlings are ready to go outside, about a week before you suspect it might be the time, you can start the process of what we call hardening off. What does that mean? It means you are taking your little seedlings and you're putting them outside, perhaps for an hour or so, and then you bring them back in. The next day, you take them out for 2 hours, and bring them back inside, and then 3 hours, and try to work it up to 5 to 7 hours of being outside, at which point we deem that those seedlings have hardened off. They're ready to be and brought into the reality of our outside world. While you are hardening them off, prepare your planting area. And I'm going to have a couple slides on that. But prepare it before you bring your transplants out. And this is one place that I forget it. I forget my own advice every year, and I get excited and I bring everything out, all my transplants out, and then prep the soil area. And I look over and all the tomatoes are flopped over and kind of wilting because they're a little bit stressed, and especially if it's a hot day. So prep the space, then bring your seedlings out. And then afterwards, make sure that you water them nicely. Give them a good solid drink. Even if your soil feels fairly moist, give them a good solid drink. Water or transplanting is stressful for our plants. Don't skimp on that soil preparation. Potentially do a soil test, see if you're lacking in any nutrients, or if you're over in nutrients, you need to be aware of it. Try and loosen the soil a little bit. If you're digging in any new amendments, put that in before the day you're planning to transplant. Give it some time for microbes to adjust the soil and everything. Try not to work wet soil. So if you are planning to get out and work in your gardens this weekend with the moisture we've been getting, it might be good to wait or test if your soil is too moist. To test your soil, you can take a handful, squeeze it hard. If it holds into a very hard ball and you can't crumble it, it might, or if it's dripping, it might be too wet to realistically plant it out. Try not to work that soil if it's wet or if it's extremely dry. You want to have it hold a shape but crumble nicely once you squeeze it more. And try not to overwork it. Your goal is to have marbles. Let's see the shape, the little clods of soil here. You don't want it to look like flour. I think I'm getting to somebody asked about fertilizing scheduled after transplanting. I think I have a slide on that a little bit later. So we are almost to the point, or we are at the point where some of our seeds might have been planted outside already. Generally speaking, the larger seeds are easier to sow outside, but that doesn't mean they're the only ones that you do. If you're planting root crops, so carrots or turnips or radishes, beets, that kind of thing, those should be sown directly into the ground always. Other things like melons and cucumbers benefit from direct sowing. Beans as well are direct sown. Make sure that you prepare your garden soil well, remove any large stones or weeds, get that soil bed smooth. Once again, that marbles, not flour kind of shape. So make sure you read your soil pack or your seed packet and space and plant to the depth on the packet recommendation. If your seeds need light to germinate, maybe just put a skiff of soil over the top. This is for lettuces and the like. Very, very small seeds, you might just be putting a skiff of soil over the top. Make sure that your seeds have good contact with the soil. Tamp it down very gently after you sow it, and water gently to avoid disturbing those seeds. Try not to allow the soil surface to dry out, because when it dries out, you're more likely to get a crust on the surface that is going to be hard for the seeds to germinate through. And then thin those seedlings according to the package after germination. Some seeds you will have to thin no matter how carefully you space them out. There's a question about direct sowing native flower seeds. There are a lot of native flower seeds that are direct sown very effectively. It's going to be dependent on the particular type that you're growing. Looks like Lisa's answering more specifically. Okay, let's dive into some selected crops. I had to put peas in here, even though it's a little bit late, because peas are so amazing. You can put them, you might be able to put them in if you put them in this, like in the next few days or so, or the next week or so. Soil temperatures can be very low. Peas are one that really benefit from that pre-germination. Put them inside in a can in some kind of container for a few days before you plant them out. Suddenly they'll plump up and they'll look more like a fresh pea and be ready to germinate much more rapidly. And it only takes about 2 months before you get to harvest them. Our brassicas are cole crops. You can plant outside with very cool soil temperatures. They tolerate freezes down to 28 degrees quite well. And you want to start your seeds 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost, or purchase transplants. Transplant them with those when there's 1 or 2 true leaves. So you can see these guys right here. These are prime age for transplanting. When you're planting those seeds, plant them about 1/2 inch deep. Our season isn't quite long enough to transplant to direct sow these, unless you have some kind of season extension, some way to warm that soil a little bit outside and mitigate temperatures. So these are good ones to start inside. Transplant should be 7 to 18 inches apart, depending on what you're growing. Kohlrabi can be closer. Brussels sprouts are going to need more space. And it takes crops about 50 to 80 days to mature at that after they have been transplanted. Okay, our alliums or onions. These actually do really well in Colorado, direct sown into the ground. But if you don't want to have to be thinking about your garden in early March, you can pre-germinate or pre-start them and grow them until they're about the size in this picture down here, and then transplant them out. Or you can buy seeds or the sets or starts, those little shallot-looking things, or the ones that look like very dried out baby onions. But seeds take about a week, 1 to 2 weeks to germinate. And usually these grow for the majority of the season, so you'll be harvesting them at the end of summer. Lettuces are a great option for our plants. Lettuces can be started very effectively inside. You could start some lettuce today and transplant them out in a week or 2. They germinate quite rapidly. They transplant very well, but they can also be direct sown outside. I strongly recommend any lettuces that you plant that you succession sow them. That means that you're only planting a row or 2 this week, and then next week or in a week or 2, you might plant a second row so that you get regular harvests over time. And that can help you extend your lettuce harvesting season into a little bit more of the hot summer when they start to want to bolt. Once you're into peak summer, choose varieties like the Batavian lettuces that will tolerate heat a little bit better, or the head types that will resist bolting a little bit more. That succession sowing will reduce bolting a little bit, and use a shallow planting depth. So these guys really don't want a lot of soil on top of them. Usually it only takes 5 or 6 weeks to get baby greens. If you want that salad size, as long as you're watering and fertilizing regularly every couple of weeks. For fertilizer, every few days. For watering, you might get a head lettuce in about 2 months. Spinaches. Spinach can be planted 2 to 4 weeks before last frost, so like right now. And plant those seeds about 1/2 inch deep. They are a little bit particular about germination, so you really want to make sure that you are gently tamping those seeds into the soil and getting good soil to seed contact for good spinach germination. Once you have germinated them, and you're starting to see just a little bit popping up, you can cover with straw mulch or some other kind of lightweight mulch. Keep it well watered and grow them. You can grow them with cool daytime temperatures. They can survive light freeze, but not a hard freeze. So anywhere above 28 degrees, spinach will push through it fairly well. If you start seeing your spinach bolting, you can do a succession sow, There are some non-spinach heat-tolerant varieties that I'm happy to talk about at another point. I need to make sure I get through all of these slides. In terms of our root crops, beets, carrots, radishes, these can be planted about now as well, 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost date. Soil temperatures can be as low as 35 degrees, but these are all ones that like to germinate warm. So you can pre-germinate or warm that soil a little bit if you would like to as well. Both beets and carrots will likely require thinning. Beets in particular have multiple seeds in the little seed, what we plant as a seed. So you will need to thin them, but beet greens are amazing in a stir fry, so it's not a big hardship. And obviously total days to harvest will vary depending on your crop. You can start as soon as 60 days after you have planted, though. They can be pretty quick to getting up and growing. Our Solanaceous, I kept this in, even though it's a little bit late to plant them, just for future reference. But generally speaking, you want somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks head start before last frost date, before you, when you're starting these guys. You can plant the seeds fairly shallow, about 1/4 inch indoors, and make sure you have some warmth on them. They like to germinate about 80 degrees or so. For tomatoes in particular, you can delay transplant until a couple weeks after your last frost date. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room there. Tomatoes in particular are wonderful because you can plant them deep and they will form what we call adventitious roots all along the stem that is underground. So it's kind of a nice way to make sure you get even more rooting area as you're transplanting them. When you want to transplant tomatoes and peppers is about at the stage that these are at. They're maybe a little thinner than a pencil. They've got 4 to 5 true leaves. These ones right here are those cotyledons. You can see how differently shaped they are from the standard leaf. But they all want to go out once those soil temperatures are nice and warm. You don't want to push it on the tomatoes in particular. Our vine crops generally like to be seeded directly in the ground. So that means you're putting 2 or 3 seeds in one hole, thinning it down once they have germinated. Or you can germinate them and plant them once they've reached about this stage. So you can see these are the cotyledons, 1, 2. These are the true leaves, 1, 2. That is a perfect stage to transplant them. They love to germinate really warm and they like to grow really warm. So wait until everything is nice and warmed up before you get them out into your garden. They don't need to be planted super shallow. They're a fairly large seed, so you can plant them about 1 inch deep into the ground. And they do tend to have a little bit poor germination, or poorer than many of our vegetables. So that's why I say plant 2 or 3 seeds in one hole, because you're guaranteed then to get a seedling emerging from that area. Our beans, both bush and pole, are going to be direct sown. These are not ones you start inside. And you want to plant them in warm soil over 60 degrees. Plant them pretty deep, 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep, and give them some good space. You want 6 to 8 inches between plants, especially if you want really good production. Beans will produce less over time. They don't need a ton of fertilizer. Too much nitrogen is going to encourage them to have a lot of leaves and not quite as much fruit. Potatoes I put in here. You can plant potatoes from seeds. There are companies that will sell you seeds, but they're going to need to be started much, much earlier. Generally speaking, we buy seeds as seed potatoes. So you'll be cutting up a seed potato into 2 or 3 pieces, planting that into the ground 6 to 8 inches deep, and then hilling it around them once or twice as the plants grow up. They could probably go in about now, when soil temperatures are above 45 degrees, and 2 to 4 weeks before we have reached our last frost. So it's looking about the right time to get those potatoes in the ground. Okay, a little bit on flowers and herbs. Annual seeds are going to be the easiest to grow and germinate. You can start them indoors or outdoors generally. They are flowers that complete their life cycle in 1 year and start new from new seed each year. Biennials are going to take 2 years to complete their life cycle. If you're buying them from a nursery with a flower on them already, they have already gone through that first rosette year. Perennials, there's both short-lived and long-lived perennials, and we've got a lot of both of them in Colorado. You can start them indoors, or if the seed packet lets you know, then they will tell you if you can start them outdoors. Most flowers, if you're starting them outdoors, unless you've saved the seed, they should be good to plant around the last frost date, because the seed companies have already done any necessary preparations. I'm going to get into that for a little while. But flowers and herbs, you're really going to want to start them early. It can take extra time for them to grow. A lot of them grow slowly. Exceptions are things like marigolds, zinnias, or cosmos. These are annuals that grow very rapidly. Dormancy requirements are going to vary between species. Some may require cold stratification or scarification. So what is this? These are types of dormancy in the seed that help them make sure that if in the wild, they make it through to the growing season when they can grow effectively. So stratification can be warm or cold treatments. The cold treatments, you put a moist plastic bag in the refrigerator, or you plant your seeds in the fall. Generally that 45 or 35 to 45 degree temperature is kind of the sweet spot for cold treatment. Warm treatments are less common. Certain conifers need heat in order to successfully germinate. Think wildfires. Not as common for us to be doing here. But soil temperatures will affect germination. So some examples of flowers that need stratification: arnica, balloon flower, evening primrose, hollyhock need that cold treatment before they will germinate successfully. Most commercial seeds you're buying will come pre-treated, but if you're saving seed from a friend or from your own yard, you will need to do that stratification yourself. Scarification is scratching the seed coat. This allows plants to absorb water more rapidly and will improve germination for other plant types even. Columbine, moonflower, lupine, and morning glories all will need some type of scarification to successfully germinate. Once again, this is most important if you're saving your own seed. If scarification is required for a commercially purchased seed, it will tell you on the seed packet that you need to scritch it with some sandpaper or clip it with a fingernail clipper or something like that. The sandpaper method works really well. Get 2 pieces of sandpaper and just rub the seeds in between it, and that will gently, you don't want to destroy the seeds or turn them into sawdust, but gently rub them together, and that usually is sufficient for scarifying your seeds. Okay, I made it with time to spare. Yes, I know I blasted through some of that. I'm happy to go over more specifics if there are questions coming in. Oh, fungus gnats. Lisa's already answering that. Fungus gnats are usually a sign that you have a little too much moisture in your soil. And so knocking back on water can be a really good way to go. But happy to answer other questions if you guys have them. It's the perfect time to be getting a lot of seeds into the ground at the moment. It's really just those tomatoes, peppers, and such that we've kind of missed that window on a little bit.
We had any unanswered questions, Lisa, unless you had one that Cassie should answer live. There were great questions from everybody.
Oh, somebody
The
started.
other part of the fungus gnat question was aphids. What do you do about aphids in the vegetable garden?
Aphids in the vegetable garden, I mean, Lisa, you're the one to answer that. It's like biologicals can be a good option. Also, aphids are really, really weak insects. If you get a strong blast of water and spray them down, you can get a good handle on them. Covering with a row cover that you seal around well, if you don't have any yet, can also be a good strategy.
So there's a couple new questions if you wanted to look at them.
Let's see, asparagus. They want to know about fertilizer habits. Since asparagus is a perennial vegetable, you're probably looking at fertilizing early in the season, and then maybe once a month or so through the growing season. You don't need to fertilize as much as a vegetable garden. You're probably only harvesting them for 4 to 6 weeks in the springtime. So regular fertilizer, fairly light, can be effective. I don't know much about germinating flax seeds. I would have to do a little bit of research on that. If you want to send me an email, I can do a little bit of research. For dry beans, you can definitely do you can pre-soak beans and then plant them outside. The main thing that pre-soak does is it just helps you get a little bit of a jump start on our relatively short growing season and gives you a little bit of a head start. Pinching off for more blooms, which types of flowers? It's a little outside of the scope of this topic, but yes, effectively, anytime that you pinch back a plant, you're going to stimulate side growth and side shoots, so you'll get more flowers and more growth over time. Sprouting apple seeds. The main thing for sprouting apple seeds is that you're not going to be getting the same apple as was grown on the tree. Apples do not grow true to seed. So I think it takes them a fair amount of time to germinate, making sure that they stay moist, but not too moist, kind of find that Goldilocks zone of moisture. In a potting soil is probably going to get you there over time, but might take some trial and error before you find the right balance. Oh, and thank you. Asparagus fertilization in the chat. Thank you. All right, I know I blasted through a bunch of stuff, but hopefully that was helpful and inspired you to get out there and planting in your garden. Let's see. Somebody started their tomatoes and peppers a little late, coming on 2 weeks ago. They've got their first true leaves, but the peppers don't have them yet. Can you fertilize to get them vigorous and ready to plant? I would not fertilize too much unless you're starting to see a little bit of discoloration. If they're starting to yellow, really water, making sure that you're on top of keeping them moist but not overly wet is going to be the key there for really good, successful germination and rapid growth. I also have had some tomatoes that were planted only about 2 weeks ago and peppers. So you should still be all right, especially if you push your planting back to around Memorial Day rather than aiming for that Mother's Day. We get snow on Mother's Day 50% of the time anyway, so you might as well just push it back a little bit further. You should be good to go. All right.
All right. Last chance for questions for Cassie. You have 5 minutes. Whatever you ask her, you could ask her about Powerball numbers for tonight. I don't know whatever you got.
Yes, somebody says they wait until Memorial Day weekend. I do as well, partly because I'm never on top of things enough to get things planted out around Mother's Day. The true leaves on your brassicas are spindly and yellow. Yes, give them a little bit more light and definitely give them just a little bit of nitrogen. If you can do like a water-soluble nitrogen of some kind. Will there be future webinars about overwintering plants? I think, Eric, aren't you doing a season extension?
I'm doing one on season extension, but I'm not sure we address that, like specifically, but we'll take it. That's a good idea. So maybe we'll incorporate it.
Yeah.
It's towards the end of the summer for that talk.
Leggy brassicas be planted deeply. Unfortunately, no, they don't do that adventitious root miraculous thing that the tomatoes do. Really, you want to you want to increase the light intensity and maybe give them a little bit more fertilizer to stimulate extra growth. Is it too late to broadcast flower seeds outside to see what will take? It depends what flower seeds you're looking at. Some flower seeds, it would be great to put them out now, give them 30 days or so of cool nights, but some of them are not going to be tolerant of freeze. So it's really, that's that extension answer of it depends on a lot of different things. If you have a specific seed mix that you're looking at, you can look at the back of it and it will tell you whether you broadcast it before, during, or after that last frost date. All right, you guys got me for a little bit more. I'm happy to keep answering questions.
Right.
All right.
Oh gosh, it was so close. I was about to shut it down, but This looks like just a comment on
Yeah.
flax, so that's very helpful.
Flax can be as easy to grow as cosmos. You sprinkle it out and then you water it in, germinate, and I guess it grows pretty easily. Nice. I have flax in my garden, but I inherited it. I did not plant it.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
My favorite plant to
Guess
grow
it's
from
fast.
seed and why? Ooh. Yes. My favorite plant is yes. That's like asking a reader what their favorite book is. No, I really like growing my tomatoes and peppers from seed. And honestly, I just love.
I'm Don Jensen. Eric came
Amen.
on. Eric.
Oh, Eric,
up,
you're not
Jesse?
muted.
That
Yeah. See, the thing I love about growing vegetables in particular from seed is just that you take that brown, inert little thing, and then suddenly it is growing and beautiful. Do I recommend putting veggie seeds in damp paper towel before putting in a seed mix? I'm guessing by that you mean planting it in the media. Yeah, you definitely can that was what I explained was the pre-germination. It can be a really good idea. But I ferment the tomato seeds that I save. I rarely do save tomato seeds. I tend to want to try new varieties every year, and so I buy them. And in the job I work in, tomatoes just come. I don't seek them out very often. I only grew one tomato variety in my own house this year. So, but yes, in order to get really good germination, you do need to do that soak and ferment of the tomatoes, or you can just leave them in there in the fruit. If you're the lazy route, you can leave them in the fruit for about a month, and by the time they get really soggy and squishy, they are usually pretty safe to save as well. The lazy person's method for saving seeds. In a longer version of this talk, I have a section on seed saving, but I did take it out for today. All right, I think we are at 1 o'clock, so I will, if you have other questions, you can shoot me emails. I love to get pictures. Sometimes I might put your pictures in future talks if they're super, super fun or useful. So thank you guys so much for joining.